Doozy.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM. Well, I've got an interesting interview for you tonight with Beverly Hammond. She's the Chief Business Officer for a brand new advertising agency that's just launched called Broken Heart Love Affair. And I wanted to chat with Beverly because I've run into her in business in the past, find her an interesting person, but also launching, a brand new advertising agency at this time, and why the name and who's actually advertising now. So Beverly, how are you? Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Brian. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start right from the top. Why Broken Heart Love Affair is a name?
Sounds like a band, doesn't it?
It does.
It's all about the fact that the advertising industry is an industry that's constantly breaking our hearts. So, you fall in love with great ideas and maybe they don't sell through, or, it's always this tension between being in love with what you do and having your heart broken all the time and coming back for more in this world. So it's essentially based on that. And it sounds like a band.
So advertising is a broken heart. Is that what you're saying?
It can be. There can be some broken hearts in advertising, yes.
Okay. And give us a little quick overview of your background. Why is that background relevant to opening a advertising agency?
Sure. Well, I'll start by just telling you maybe a little bit about the agency itself. It's pretty unique, but it brought together, there are 5 partners, and it was pretty disruptive this year. 3 of the top creatives in the country left their existing big agencies, and the top strategist in the country, and came to start a new entrepreneurial venture. So that's what this is. I'm the business, they're the brilliance. And so I was the one who was more accustomed to, being in an entrepreneurial environment. So it's a very unique, and it's a new thing for just about all of the partners, with the exception of me, to actually be launching their own agency. So that's kind of the context for where we are. And my background is I started in politics, and then I moved into the marketing communications world and had an agency called Veritas for a while. Then I started another agency called Republic, which was more of an integrated marketing agency, and now onto Broken Heart Love Affair.
And why launch in the middle of a pandemic?
I know. That's a very good question. Well, as you know, Brian, these things don't happen overnight. They take a long time. As I mentioned, we have these top creative folks leaving big agencies. So that's months of process to make that happen. So, this whole thing started about a year ago. Started conversations that really continued in earnest in the fall. And then obviously with very senior executives leaving agencies, there's a lot of time, a lot of negotiation there. So by the time we were ready to go, it was just so happened that we landed ourselves into a pandemic. And it was very, it was very weird, because after all the work and the business planning and everything to get to it, we literally wore masks and gloves when we signed our shareholders agreement. It was right at the beginning of this, and nobody really knew. So it was the only time we were all together in the office wearing masks, signing the shareholders agreement. So
and can you tell us about some of the creative geniuses that you've joined up with?
Sure. I'm very excited to tell you about them, actually. Carlos Moreno was the Global Chief Creative Officer at an agency called Cassette. And he is one of the partners, along with Denise Rosetto and Todd Mackey, and they were the co-chief creative officers at another really great agency, BBDO. And then their chief strategist is Jay Cheney, who was at Cassette, and then had his own group called Advice, and went in-house. He's a strategist, but he went in-house to a financial group called Coho for a while, and was their chief marketing officer. But anyway, now we're all in this.
And why leave big firms and go to start an entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In our business, it's really interesting because creatives, unlike other businesses where when you get when you move up the ladder, creative officers in advertising don't get to touch work as much anymore. They become administrators essentially. And these are three creatives who really, really love the work and they just really wanted to get back to the work and away from, not as much as the other stuff. So in the ad industry, it's ad agencies are interesting because you typically as you work your way up, you bring in junior people under you who are doing a lot of the work. And we've decided that that model is not what this group wants to be part of. So we've created a new model that's all senior people, almost like a consulting model.
And as a client, if I hire you, is that better for me or worse for me? Obviously I might get access to more senior people, but is it a lot more expensive because there's none of
Yeah.
the worker bees?
Well, it's really interesting you asked that too, because we call it the inversion model. So the agency model is built on uh, junior people, way more time. It's all, everything's by time. So it's like a legal model. It's like hiring a lawyer and you pay for them by hours. So we say we invert that model. These guys have tremendous experience, so it takes much less time and you get way more senior talent. So it's years and years of being, the best at their tasks and the best in their business. So they're able to get to things more quickly. And we don't sell time, we sell ideas. So it's a different model than a typical agency where you're actually buying time and there's a lot of churn. And if you buy time, there's a lot of time to be sold.
But when you say you sell ideas, so what? If you don't come up with a brilliant new creative idea, I don't have to pay a thing?
No, we'll always come up with a brilliant creative idea, but we sell them as products. So we would sell to get to an idea. We would sell it as a product, not it, because it may take 15 minutes. It may take 15 days. So it really depends, and we just don't believe it should be based on that. It should be based on what the output is and how great the idea is.
And what's the client response been so far?
Great, great. And we're not for everybody, but we've had a really good response so far. I think there's a feeling, and we were solving, obviously when you start a new business, you think about what problems you're solving. And one of the issues in our business has been the agency client relationship. And part of that is based on this whole hours and people trying to make sure, how do they measure value and all of that good stuff. So we've had a great response. We've got a roster of 9 clients right now. And this is all, we launched on March 30th. So
1 month in.
it's just, yeah, a little over a month and almost 2 months.
Well, we're chatting with Beverly Hammond right now, the Chief Business Officer for a brand new advertising agency that took advantage of launching in one of the probably worst economic times of history, a broken heart love affair. We're going to take a break for messages and come back with her in just a minute.
All right.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting with Beverly Hammond. She's the Chief Business Officer for Broken Heart Love Affair. I was wondering exactly what it was when she posted it on LinkedIn, but it's an advertising agency and she's just launched it. And in the middle of COVID-19, Beverly, are people actually advertising? I thought that advertising would have gone down dramatically during this era. Are people buying products?
Well,
Retail sales are down.
Of course, retail sales are down. So I think it depends on the industry, obviously, right now, like anything. It's important to note that there's a lot of empirical evidence that brands who continue to spend during any kind of economic collapse, and there's a lot of data back to the depression and the recession and on, that their brands tend to do better in the long term. So we are seeing as well, of course, right now, great brands stepping up and trying to be part of the conversation and trying to actually help people in this time. So those brands are obviously advertising and creating advertising. Also, these things also don't happen overnight. So people are planning, they're building their plans, they're strategizing, coming up with a creative that will eventually, in the next few months, turn into consumer-facing advertising. So there is a lot of activity. The challenge, of course, is with production. Hard to shoot an ad, of course, when you have to stay, when you have to social distance and you have to stay 6 feet apart. But production houses are starting to come back on stream now. And companies are finding really innovative ways to produce advertising and produce creative.
Now, I find it interesting that you say that there's a lot of research that suggests that companies that continue advertising in a tough time, tough economic time, do well. Why do you think that's the case? Is it because sort of the airwaves are less vacant, or because people are still looking for who's out there? What is it?
Yeah, I think people are still looking for who's out there. And, brands, part of we say our mission is to inspire people to fall in love with brands again. And I think over the past little while, we've seen a bit of an erosion in that relationship between consumers and brand loyalty. And when consumers see brands out there, when brands, I don't know if you've seen some of the Nike work recently, or even IKEA, there's so many brands that are out there right now engaging with their audiences and trying to um, help them feel better and make them know, help they know they're out there, and there's some sense of normalcy, and there's a sense of confidence that they're giving, and consumers appreciate that. People appreciate it. So I'm not a psychologist, but
So they're not necessarily just advertising, buy my product. They're somehow making people feel better about our current situation.
absolutely. And as we come out of it, we'll see some of that kind of communication, getting people to feel better about where we're at and give people hope that, there is actually, there'll be a light at the end of this tunnel. So there's that, but there is also just communicating about your brand and the values of your brand, the values that you share with your consumers.
Mark Cuban made an interesting comment. I'm not sure if you heard it, but he said something to the effect of brands and companies that treat their employees and their customers right will define their brand for the next 10 years.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And
Really?
it's really about not being, it's about communicating the values of your brand and what you stand for and connecting with those people that align. Yeah,
And
brand.
so some brands that are laying people off, and companies that are laying people off and or not providing refunds or doing inappropriate things from just worried about themselves and their own financial situation rather than their customers, are going to harm their reputation long term.
Well, I think they certainly will in the short term. Now, I should just preface that by saying there are layoffs happening all over the place, and even great organizations are in situations right now where they have to lay people off. I think it's how you do it, and it's how you treat your customers. And we've all been reading and seeing stories of bad customer service, and it's unfortunate, but I do think it will, like in any case and in any era, it will affect how people feel about the brand. I'm sure you have had some experiences in the last month or two where you felt, wow, that's, wasn't expecting that. That wasn't, that's not fair.
Well,
I
I
had,
was surprised. I got a telephone call from my financial institution, my bank, and they asked me how I was, and they asked me if they could help. And then they offered me a website to lower my credit card interest rate. I was surprised that a bank was actually
right.
reaching out like that in a time of problems for everybody.
That's great. That's a good bank. You should give them a plug right now.
No, I thought it was quite good, and so what I've done in my own business is try to reach out to people and find out how they are, and express confidence that we're going to come through this, and ask, is there anything I can do? And so I think that people do appreciate the old line about a friend in need is a friend indeed.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I also think that um, when you do that, so when you don't do that, or you do something quite the opposite of that, the effect is even greater. People at this time feel, everybody's full of anxiety, and people want to feel some hope. They want to know somebody cares. They want to know somebody's out there. And I think that's great that your bank's a terrific example of that.
So people want to feel some hope. So how do you think companies can go out and brands can go out and advertise hope, convey hope?
Well, I think we're seeing it. There's a great Nike spot that just came out that actually talks about, one thing is sport has taught us that you're never too far down to come back. So that's a great one. The other one is showing some empathy in some way. IKEA did something right out of the gate when this all happened around how your home loves you. and showing all these, without advertising products or sales or any kind of promotion. They're actually talking, just showing different scenes in a home where people could really trying to communicate to really love your home in this time when you're stuck there,
Right.
and so
Well,
it's empathy and it's connection.
now I people aren't buying necessarily in malls and at retail stores as much today as they were, but
Yeah.
people are watching TV a lot. The viewership for news programs has gone through the roof. People are getting a little tired of that now, but I think that there has been a fair amount of interest in what's going on, and so eyeballs on screens were there for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. The challenge, as I said, for any big production, for TV production, it's a little bit tough if you're doing something new, just simply because it's hard to get the work produced.
What about how can you access all these people that are working at home? Working at home, here I am in my home office,
Mhm.
working at home using social media, using a whole bunch of other vehicles to communicate with their companies and other fellow employees. Is there any way that you can advertise via those mediums?
Sure, and I think those mediums already are being used for advertising. So, paid social is and digital, those are big mediums right now. So that isn't changing. I think it's just what's the message and are you actually still doing it or have you stopped
I was
during this?
surprised to see that, I think, and I may be wrong in this regard, but that some of the big social media companies like Facebook and other things, their market caps had gone down because people had commented that people weren't advertising as much anymore. And I would have thought the reverse, that this is the perfect time to advertise.
Yeah, it is, and I don't, I think some may be because they're having some issues, depending on what the industry is or who the business is. There are all kinds of reasons why people aren't, but pulling back your marketing budgets at a time like this um, doesn't prove to be valuable over the long term.
It's interesting because I'm not familiar with marketing budgets, but I have done my own research in whether companies should be acquiring or not during tough economic times. And it's fascinating that the companies that make acquisitions, that invest in CapEx, that launch new products, that do expansion growth oriented items during tough economic times are the ones that actually do the best. And it's the companies that just batten down the hatches and wait out the storm and hope it's all going to get better in a couple of months are the ones that actually, treading water don't
Right.
necessarily do well. So it's interesting that what you're saying is that now's the time to invest in marketing.
Yeah. There's a great New York Times just this past weekend, I think, talking about that, about starting businesses. So, whether that's an acquisition or, whether it's something like we did. But during economic collapse, like Disney was started during an economic collapse, Microsoft, GM, Uber, Slack, the list goes on. It's quite fascinating to see. And when you think about the transition right now in our economy, which we're starting to see, for some people, very sadly, it's being forced upon us, and industries are being heavily disrupted right now.
Right.
Probably more so or as much as since the Industrial Revolution. This is probably, worse for some. And there are all kinds of new little things that will pop up out of this. There are all kinds of new businesses that will come out of the new way of doing things going forward.
So do you think that this is going to change dramatically business or are we going to just return to where we were in January?
It's probably somewhere in between. I'm not sure we'll return to where we were in January, but I'm depending again on the industry. There are some things that won't change. Humans haven't changed. So, we're still human. We still want to be, engaged on different topics. We want people to feel empathy for us. We want to connect. Those things won't change.
Well, people,
So, how we go about doing.
I'm not sure if you have any clients that are, clothing stores, clothing retailers, or other companies that are in retail malls. But will people go back to retail malls like the Eaton Center and Sherway and Square One and walk into stores and try on clothes and things like that again?
I think they will again. I'm not sure when that will be. I think probably people will need to have some comfort, but I think we're seeing right now people have varying levels of comfort out there. So yes, that'll happen. I don't know when it'll happen, but it will happen. As you can imagine, having launched at the end of March, we don't have any brands like that as clients right now because they're not in the situation to be even operating.
We're chatting with Beverly Hammond, the Chief Business Officer of a brand new advertising agency that launched during COVID-19. We're going to take a break for a message and come right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960 AM. We're chatting with Beverly Hammond. She is the Chief Business Officer of a brand new advertising agency, which has got to have the most interesting name I've ever heard. Beverly, what's the name of your firm, please?
It is Broken Heart Love Affair.
Broken Heart Love Affair, which does sound like a rock band, a country rock band. Maybe. How did this business venture all come about? You said that a whole bunch of senior people from a bunch of different agencies all decided to leave their jobs and get together in an entrepreneurial venture. How does such a thing happen?
Well, it started with a number of different conversations over a long period of time. And there's sort of one person in the center of it who brought everybody together. And he and I had started working together about a year ago and had some conversations at the time about how to formalize some kind of an arrangement, and work together in a more formal way with my old agency. And then that just started to evolve a bit, and he was having other conversations with some senior creatives who he knows very well and works very closely with, and they all really felt like it was time for them in their careers to do something like this. And Jay just happened to know all of us, and he brought us all together over a number of conversations over the last few months.
And have you got new office space? Are you all working from home or both?
Well, right now we're all working from home. We did spend one day in the office when we signed the shareholders agreement. Actually, it wasn't even a full day. We spent about 2 hours in the office. The office is actually the previous was my former agency's office space. So we had all of the infrastructure from my last agency, which was great. It allowed us to sort of move ahead of that start. We kind of missed the startup phase in a way because we had all the infrastructure and everything in place, which was great.
Now, you said that you've changed the model from a time-based model to an idea model. And I've always, struggled with this idea of paying creative people for their time, because really, you're right. What you want is the great idea. And if they spend a whole bunch of time and they don't come up with any great ideas, what are you buying? So tell me, how does the creative process work? Do you spend a whole bunch of time? Do you come up with a million ideas and throw them up against the wall and then have other people in your team attack them? Or do you get a light bulb in the middle of a shower?
Well, it could be any of the above, but basically our process is set up so that we start with strategy. No great creative idea just happens. They're all, the best creative ideas are very strategically sound. So we always start with the strategic piece. And from there,
which is what? Give me an example. What do you mean by the strategic piece?
So that's
where I want to go, what I want to achieve.
That's right, and we learn all about the business and the humans that the business is communicating with, and a lot about why they interact with that business or service or product or whatever that is, and come up with a strategic approach that will anchor in the creative idea. So this is a strategy based on what we're trying to achieve and what we sell and who we're selling it to. This is the strategy. Then we brief the creative. So this is what our chief strategy officer does. He briefs the creative team, and our process is different in that all three of them immerse, and it's a very immersive process where the three of them just get after it and spend a bunch of time on the idea, and they're interacting directly with the strategist at the same time. So they're not farming it out to a junior team to deal with or farming it out to somebody else to deal with. You've got the best most senior creatives thinking about your idea together. And then, and however many, they might come up with 100 ideas, they might come up with 5 ideas, but we show the client all the ideas. So it's very transparent. It's immersive, it's transparent. The client sees all the ideas with the recommended ideas. And right now we're doing it in a really neat way. It's like a virtual whiteboard, which is kind of cool. So that people can see where the thinking was going. Because sometimes with clients, they'll look at something and say, wow, you know what, that's a really interesting way into this problem. And together we come to another better place or a bigger place. So the client sees all the ideas. We obviously recommend the ideas we think are the most powerful. And we decide together with the client which ones we want to actually move forward with.
If you've got, 3 senior creative people that have been in the business for a long period of time, is that good or is that bad? Are they, you think about great ideas. Do people get great ideas and it's an experience that you get and you keep getting great ideas forever? Or is a great idea someone that brand new has to come up with?
Well, I think it's got to do with the alchemy. I've watched this team. I'm amazed at watching how they operate. In that somebody has a thought and then somebody else builds on it, and there's just this back and forth that actually just makes ideas better and better and better and better. And can happen pretty quickly. The team, they've known each other for a long time, so that helps. Obviously, they're very comfortable. They have a ton of respect for each other and for how they operate. So it's really about the alchemy. They get in a room. I say in air quotes right now. They get in a room together and they start to go and they just talk through everything and build and build and build and just keep putting the next idea on the wall and the next idea on the wall until they get to the place that they all feel really great about. They're all just, they're real specialists.
What do you mean by the word alchemy?
Just their ability, there's a magic when some people just don't connect well or they don't communicate well. There's a real magic with some people when they get together and they just, everything they do, they're able to build on each other. And it starts with a whole lot of respect. Carlos Moreno, one of the chief creative officers, always says, as long as we all come into the room with the right intention, great things will happen. And that's exactly how it rolls. So this group gets together and they start to bounce ideas and start to build off of others' ideas in a really respectful, positive way. And they know each other well enough and they have enough respect for each other that if somebody says that's not the direction we should go, everybody's good with it. They trust each other's judgment. It's really critical.
There was a great book called Creativity by the former CEO of Pixar, a film company. And he talked about, I think he called it notes meetings, which sounded like sort of your whiteboard meetings. And he said that those were the keys to success at Pixar, that you had to have people that got together that could build off of each other. And his one rule was all the contributions had to be positive contributions. You couldn't have negative, so that you couldn't say something was bad, but you could say how something could be improved.
Right. There's also, they talk about that in in stand-up comedy, right? If you're doing any kind of improv, they talk about in improv troupes, you're supposed to always say not, no, or you always say and. That's not entirely how this happens, but it's the same concept.
So you think there's a special alchemy with people when they connect, they respect, they come into the room with the right intentions, but then they come back to, is creativity something that people that have been in business for 20 or 25 years get really good at coming up with brand new ideas, or a brand new idea is something that some young buck just off of the streets got to come up with? And so therefore, is your model the right model, or is the model where bringing young people the right model?
Well, Malcolm Gladwell might answer that by talking about how you become really good at something after 10,000 hours. And I think what we bring.
I can understand how you get really good at playing golf or tennis, something that like that after 10,000 hours. But creativity, is creativity something that experience and repetition helps?
Absolutely, but you also have to start with the talent. So, probably you and I aren't going to be coming up with those ideas anytime soon. But it really starts with that. And then it starts with understanding creativity is really about so much, but it's also about understanding human behavior and understanding what compels people to act, and understanding everybody's human. We're not data points. And as long as you're thinking about that, I think you'll always be creative. I can tell you that this group has it just never stops with them. It's constant. It's a constant flow of great ideas, and some people are just some people are artists, some people are poets. So and it doesn't matter if you don't have to be 22 to be a great poet. There are. So I think you just, if you look at it from that perspective, it's the same thing. It's that's all creativity.
You said you use a virtual whiteboard. What's that technology or practice that you use?
And I'm going to forget the name of it. So, but it's literally a whiteboard with little stickies on it that you put them up. It's a software. It's much like Zoom, and you get into the like a Google Docs thing, but it's actually got these little stickies, and you move them around and
So it's like
put them
a
up.
whiteboard. That's interesting. And so in the
It's
office,
like
do you have big whiteboards that's the way you would do it?
in the office we have big whiteboards, and that's how we would do it. So unfortunately, we're not in the office,
To brainstorm ideas.
but I can tell you that yeah, absolutely.
And so what does a chief business officer do?
So I do all of the stuff that's not the creative stuff. So it's all business planning, running the business. I do all of the client communication interaction, all the contracts. That's all me. I'm all the boring stuff.
But yet you're saying
But
that
it's,
as a client, I would still get interaction with the creative people. So are you my key contact person, or is the strategist the key contact person, or one of the creative people?
right. You'd probably start, depending on how you got to us, I would always be part of the conversation at some point so that I would deal with the administrative aspects of it. And then the strategist and the creatives would deal with actually creating the product. So I do all of the infrastructure and the administration around that.
Right. And I've always wondered about advertising agencies and creative. Do you specialize in, TV, video, or radio or print, or do you have to be good at it all?
I think a creative idea is a creative idea. So we like to say we specialize in brand transformation and brand domination. So we're really about coming up with big brand ideas, and I mean big ideas for brands, not just brands for big, or not just ideas for big brands. So it's about big ideas for brands who want to be number one, want to stay at number one, or who have nothing to lose by playing big.
What do you
So
mean
really
by
big ideas.
what do you mean by brand domination?
So really taking a brand and dominating the market. How can we be out there? And it doesn't necessarily mean you spend more money. It's just what ideas are the big ideas that will help your brand dominate in your industry, and
Now,
actually become more. People. You're the first thing they think of when they go to. So, for example, and this isn't a consumer product, but this team did the Sick Kids Versus campaign. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was a fundraising campaign for Sick Kids Hospital that actually transformed the way hospitals fundraise now, or how they advertise. And it generated a record fundraising for the hospital, and it changed the sector. And that's the kind of work. Another piece of work they did was the Bring Back the Bees campaign for Honey Nut Cheerios, when they took the bee off the box, and some big ideas that really differentiate brands from the other brands in their in the category.
So when you think about domination, brand domination, it's something that differentiates you in a way that is based on some really brilliant creative idea.
Yeah. Yes. It's that simple.
And bring back the bees is one of those ways that you can dominate.
Well, certainly that worked for General Mills and Honey Nut Cheerios. That was a tremendous campaign for them. That, the lift they got for that was pretty remarkable.
Now you mentioned,
And I think, the beauty. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, you mentioned on the top that you had spent some time in politics. Will your company work for politicians, and is working for politicians and politics the same, or is it different?
Well, there's a difference between government work and political work. I'm not sure we would do political work, but their governments need to communicate different programs from time to time. In Ontario, for example, there's the Advertising Review Board, and a number of agencies are sort of on a roster of agencies that get used and get hired by the government to do work, and that would interest us. Um, what's the difference? That's a loaded question, but yeah, politics is interesting, and it's also changed a bit too, as you know, in the last few years. Political
How is
advertising has
how is
evolved.
how has political advertising changed?
Well, I think it's very focused now on really speaking to very, it's very populist now, I guess is the best way to put it. There's a very strong populist undercurrent to most political advertising now, and I think it's all about attracting the base. So, shifting your base typically, or keeping your base, I guess, more than shifting it, or getting your base to buy into your idea. So, it's a little different than it was before.
I don't know if you've seen any of them, but some of the ads that Joe Biden is currently running, I'm amazed that running during this pandemic, completely straight at oppositional to the president, and they're pretty hard hitting and pretty effective.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised to see them too. But again, his base wants to see that. That doesn't mean, you or I, or, somebody who isn't in that constituency may feel a little like uncomfortable with it and ask the same questions that you're asking. But, his base wants it. He's speaking to his base, and they want him to highlight what they feel to be are the perhaps some of the shortcomings of the current president,
We're chatting with Beverly Hammond, the Chief
regardless of
Business
when it is.
Officer. Beg pardon?
Oh, I just said regardless of when it is. Okay.
We're chatting with Beverly Hammond, the Chief Business Officer for Broken Heart Love Affair, a new advertising agency. We're going to take a final break. Stay with us.
I'll stop.
We're chatting tonight with Beverly Hammond, the Chief Business Officer for Broken Heart Love Affair, which is not a country band, but a advertising agency. Beverly, you said something that you wanted to be a beacon of something with the advertising agencies and the advertising industry. What did you mean by that?
Well, like so many industries right now, Brian, our industry has really been affected. We were talking earlier about marketing budgets being cut. We've talked, about companies going under. We've seen big retailers go under. We've seen, airlines. These are big advertising clients typically, and they're all struggling. So the impact of that then, of course, is that they're not able to spend, or some have chosen not to spend, and that's impacted a number of agencies. So we've seen a lot of layoffs in our industry right now. And one of the things when we were deciding about launching or not launching, even though the horse had left the barn, one of the conversations we had was, how do we feel about doing something like this? That's a very positive thing in this time that, where people are really suffering in our industry. And we decided that what we'd like to do is try and be a bit of a beacon for folks in the business to allow them to see that there is some positivity, that there is a future for the business, that, there are some things happening that aren't, it's not all, it's not all terrible right now, which there still is a lot of that happening. And a lot of agencies have really struggled and are continuing to struggle.
Well,
So
I commend you for that effort and look forward to seeing the results. And if you have any brilliant creative in the future that you want to publicize and explain how it came about, please reach back and maybe we'll have another show. If people are interested in hiring you, do you have a website they should go to?
we do. brokenheartloveaffair.com.
Excellent. Well, Beverly Hammond, Chief Business Officer of Broken Heart Love Affair, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Brian. Take care.
Have a great evening.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We're going to take one final break, and I'm going to come back with just a few final concluding comments. Stay with us. Well, we're back on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We were chatting about advertising with Beverly Hammond, the Chief Business Officer for Broken Heart Love Affair. And she made a lot of comments that I really quite like. And she talked, number one, about firms that invest in marketing in tough times actually do quite well, and brands that invest. And I think that that's quite true, and a lot of people don't realize it. I've actually done some studies of this in my PhD thesis, and companies that invest in CapEx, that invest in acquisitions, invest in growth in the tough times have been those companies that have been the most successful long-term. And a lot of people don't realize it because a lot of companies are just sort of laying people off, furloughing employees, battening down the hatches, and trying to wait things out. And that's not the right strategy. And so I've tried to at least I don't think it's the right strategy. And I've been trying to illuminate for you, the listeners, a couple of companies that have actually invested in either new business opportunities or growth. And so Broken Heart Love Affair is one of those. The other thing that she found that I found really interesting is her conversation about how the creative process works. And she talks about this alchemy of the people that get together, that respect each other, that come in with the right intention, that have a whiteboard kind of strategic outlook. And I think that that's just a fantastic attitude to have. And so I think there's something to be learned there. I've as well, part of my doctoral studies, looked at how different groups work together successfully. And one of the concepts that I love is a concept called either intimate cerebral exchange or idea sex. And what it is that ideas have to meet, they have to mutate, they have to reproduce, they have to bounce off one another. And that's the idea of why idea sex is the descriptor. And I think that's what people need to do, what ideas need to do to be really successful. And so therefore, think about that. The alchemy of people that come into a room, into a meeting with respect, with the right intentions and positivity can end up being successful. It's a great idea. Anyway, that's Brian Crombie and the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks so much. Good night.